Alright everyone, good afternoon. Here we are, folks, aboard the 2026 KTM 992 bar. This is a nearly liter class parallel twin naked bike from KTM out of Austria. It replaces the 790 and then 890 Duke R. So now we have 990. We're riding it today.
This episode of Out on the Road is supported by Cardo Systems and its premium Pack Talk Pro Bluetooth communicator. It's easy to mount, waterproof, and automatically turns on and off. It also features giant 45mm JBL speakers. Now back to the episode.
Of course, we have a good old-fashioned mechanical key. Good job, KTM. Paying attention to the details, and we love the mechanical keys. Right away, sitting on this 990 Duke. Well, it feels very much like a Duke. And what that means is it has a very narrow feel between the rider's legs. Very narrow feel. A lot of that comes from the 947cc now parallel twin engine. The cant of these bikes, they always are a little bit on the nose. So the seat is always a little bit higher in the rear than in the front, and it just gives it a little bit steeper angle. These bikes always have that type of steep head angle. It's not so much the head angle is that steep, but that's just the ergonomics package. It feels that way. And again, very narrow. The handlebar, nice upright handlebar with a good amount of inward, rearward sweep here. So the center part of the handlebar is pretty neutral, but off on the ends, there is a good amount of rearward sweep. And that rearward sweep just makes for real comfortable street biking. If this bike was more of a supermoto bike or more of a pure track bike, we would expect a little bit more of a neutral bend. So that's the deal with the ergonomics. Very slim between the rider's legs. A neutral handlebar, except for on the ends where it's got a good amount of rearward sweep. And a little bit more aggressive seat cant. The foot pegs are not too high, not too low. Generally a good place to do work from. Real work, not the poser fake work that you see elsewhere. Now, this thing's powered by 947cc parallel twin engine, liquid cooled, dual red camshafts, 8-valve cylinder head. This engine's good for right around 110 horsepower at the business end of that tire. Right around 110 horsepower. Of course, KTM claims a little bit more, but that's what you should expect at the tire. Right around 110 horsepower, just over 60 pound-feet of torque. So, this engine is definitely playful. Playful, real good torque off the line. Nice flat torque spread, which just makes riding fun. Also really like the engine note and the exhaust note. You can't really hear the exhaust right now, but when you're standing on the side of the road, when this bike passes you, the exhaust has a really nice snarl to it. So it sounds cool, yet it's not too loud where it's overpowering and gets annoying for some folks out there. So nice exhaust note. The engine's got a nice tone here. Of course, it would be nice if it had a little bit more intake roar, we're not gonna lie, but still pretty dang good. Of course, we got a 6-speed transmission with a cable actuated slipper clutch. And this cable actuated clutch, it's got a surprisingly firm pull. So if you're someone with a really weak left hand, you're gonna have troubles actuating this clutch. It's got a very firm pull. There's probably some stiff clutch springs in there. That's the reasoning for it. I like firm clutches. The cool thing about this cable actuated clutch is it has good feel. The engagement's real precise. There's not a lot of slop. Sometimes on motorcycles, KTM motorcycles we've ridden, there might be a little bit of slop in the clutch. Not with this, it's real precise. The only caveat is you have to have a strong left hand to squeeze it. Of course, that slipper function allows the rear wheel not to skid or hop if you downshift in too low of a gear for a vehicle speed traveled. We also have an electronic quick shifter that allows for full throttle upshifts and downshifts without having to use the clutch. It's works real nice, relatively fast. The transmission itself, it feels good. The throws aren't too long, they're not too short. It feels real precise. I'd say it's pretty good. Now, powering this motorcycle is a ride-by-wire throttle. We have adjustable global power modes, combined engine power and throttle mode maps, rain, track, street, and sport, which you can see by this color horizontal TFT display. Look how wide it is. It's probably 16 by 4 are the dimensions. I'd say a very wide display, which is kind of interesting. We're going to more square and more vertical based displays in this world, so it's cool that we're seeing an ultra horizontal, ultra wide display. The fonts are very crisp, and they have KTM's now signature font package, which is used on many of its motorcycles for quite some time now. The thing I like about this TFT dash is it's real sharp. The resolution is very high. I mean, look at the detail on that 990 Duke R in that avatar image. A lot of detail in there. I think that's cool. KTM also says this display is touchscreen compatible, and it worked right there. We were trying to use it earlier. Our gloves weren't very compatible with it, but apparently they are now. If you don't want to use the touchscreen, you have this big backlit joystick wheel, multi-function controller right here that you can use. We also have turn-by-turn navigation and maps right on the display. How cool is that, folks? You no longer need to pair your iOS or Android powered smartphone with the vehicle. You can get turn-by-turn navigation and maps right there without having to pair your phone. I think that's super slick. You can add destinations, save destinations, and that just makes things a little bit more easy to use. I know when I'm riding my motorcycles, quite often the map function is not tied to the bike or your phone. So if you want to have turn-by-turn navigation, you have to pair your phone. You have to pair things with the bike, and that can kind of be cumbersome. Usually it's just generally easier to use Apple or Google Maps and then pair it with your smartphone, and then pair it with your Cardo systems, Pack Talk, Edge, or Bold, or Freecom 4X. We use them all. We like them all. Cardo systems. It's one of our favorite Bluetooth communication systems, but we digress. So that's usually the SOP when you're using that type of stuff. So having the turn-by-turn navigation right there on the display without having to pair your phone is just awesome. Or even having to have a phone. I think that's super slick. We also have this nice slick info, coolant temp, range. Speaking of range, the fuel tank capacity on this motorcycle is 3.9 gallons. It's a metal fuel tank. It looks plastic, but it's actually metal. And we've been getting right around 40 miles per gallon, which is definitely good gas mileage. I think if a motorcycle can get 40 miles per gallon, it's doing pretty well. Some sporty motorcycles get closer to 30, i.e. Aprilia's RSV4, Ducati's Panigale V4. So to get a sport motorcycle with nearly a liter class engine, albeit with only 2 cylinders, to get 40 miles per gallon, I think that's pretty good. So yeah, very nice. Of course, we can adjust the global ride modes by pushing this. You let off the throttle, and then you can engage it. But we're not going to do rain. We're going to do track. Max performance. This particular motorcycle has adjustable traction control. KTM calls it slip control, which you can adjust with these paddle style levers on the left side of the clip-on. Aprilia was one of the first to do that. Now KTM does it too. You can actually program inside the dash to have those paddles be adjustable wheelie control or adjustable slip control. So you can change wheelie control or traction control. KTM calls it slip control, wheel slip, on the fly. Pretty neat. Not gonna lie, this flashing 6th gear is a little bit annoying. Maybe it's saying that because this motorcycle still is in break-in mode. Engine braking, that is. Now with a full tank of fuel, full tank of 3.9 gallons of fuel, this motorcycle weighs just south of 400 pounds, 396 pounds to be exact. So it's a pretty lightweight motorcycle. It certainly feels lightweight in motion. Through turns, despite the more forward cant ergonomics of this motorcycle, it requires a little bit of input at the handlebar. So even though this bike's light at 396 pounds, you still have to put a decent degree of input into the handlebar to get the motorcycle to turn. Once it's turning, however, it feels very agile, very apt to change direction once the turn is initiated. It's also really responsive. It's a very light handling motorcycle, aside from that initial bar input you have to do to make it turn. Now in terms of suspension, we have KTM's in-house supplier WP suspension with an inverted 43mm fork up front. We have spring preload and compression and rebound damping, toolless damping adjustment atop the fork cap. And the spring preload adjuster is integrated into the top of the fork cap and can be changed in 3 increments. KTM and Husqvarna did this on their off-road bikes, and it's really easy for making quick preload adjustments. You don't have nearly the range as you would a conventional fork with preload adjustment, but for tuning the preload without having to need any tools, really quick style, just with your fingers, it's really slick. Out back we have a direct non-linkage equipped WP shock with preload adjustment and compression and rebound. Even the preload adjuster has a Allen type collar, so you can make adjustments. You don't need a conventional spring preload shock tool. You just need an Allen key, and you can add or subtract preload into the shock. The damping, however, does need a screwdriver, which is kind of odd because KTM really pioneers the toolless damping adjustment on the fork. I wish they would do that same with the shock, where you can just adjust the shock with clickers without having to use a screwdriver, but maybe that will come one day. Still nice that you have that slick fork preload adjustment and the Allen type rear shock preload adjustments. You don't need to have a spanner wrench with you. In terms of suspension travel, there's 5.6 inches up front, 5.5 in the back. The suspension on this bike rides pretty good. We're riding on some not fully dilapidated, but not very smooth pavement, and this bike's gliding over the rough stuff fairly well. Now we're obviously straight line riding right now, but we were dipping through turns early, and I really like how that fork, you can put quite a bit of front brake input into that fork and get that fork down in the stroke, and once it gets down, steering gets really, really sharp, and it still has good hold up. It has good grip, good hold up. You can really feel that Michelin front tire digging into the asphalt. These are one of Michelin's the best street bike tire they make currently. Michelin always has ebbs and flows between making good street bike tires and not so good street bike tires. Relatively speaking, the sport tire market's always hyper competitive, but this particular Michelin fitment is actually really good. I really like these tires, and when you're loading up that fork, the front end has a really good grip, and it just gives you confidence to ride this motorcycle maybe harder than you would other almost leader class naked bikes out there. Of course, this motorcycle now has cruise control, which is really nice. You hit this toggle button right here and then hit up, and now we have cruise control enabled. The cruise control icon's a little small, but I think we can live with that. It'd be nice if this motorcycle had heated grips as an OE setup. It's a little chilly today at 57 degrees. I know all you Midwesterners and East Coasters are going to be 57. That sounds like a nice day to ride. But for us American Southwesters, 57 degrees is a little bit chilly. Alright folks, let's make a pass. And yeah, that 990 coming to life. Whoa! You feel that? Whoa, speed. We got our speed a little high there, folks. Good thing we work for ourselves right now so no one can complain. Woo! Back to the bike. Pretty good suspension, pretty comfortable. The only thing about this motorcycle that could be better is the engine continues to have a little bit of vibration. It's certainly not bad, but there is some vibration you can feel through the controls. The rear view mirrors do a nice job of showing what's behind you, which I like, but there is some engine vibration present. The other thing is the ride-by-wire throttle. While it's very intimate and nice while you're riding, the throttle is a little sensitive if you're trying to do a wheelie. This motorcycle, it just is a little herky-jerky when you're trying to do wheelies. So, not going to say the throttle response isn't good, isn't smooth, isn't aggressive, because it is. But when you're trying to lift that front wheel, it can be a little herky-jerky. Just something to get used to with these ride-by-wire bikes, especially the Euro ride-by-wire bikes. Alright folks, we're pinned down behind this boring SUV. We're going to catch up with you folks here when we start mashing through some turns up here. Finally, some clear asphalt ahead of us with some bends. How cool is this? And this is where the 990 Duke R is at home. Again, some handlebar pressure needs to be inputted to initiate a turn, but once this bike is turning, holy cow, it is very nimble and feels good on the side of its tire. Like this engine, plenty of power, plenty of get up, good amount of torque. We said the engine does vibrate, but honestly, it does vibrate, but KTM's done a nice job of neutraling. These engines used to vibrate like crazy back in the day, and they're smoother than ever. So good job, KTM. You can feel a little vibration through the handlebar and the foot pegs, but it's the right type of vibration. It makes riding fun and viscerally engaging. This touchscreen setup works really good. We're working it now with our thumb, and very, very slick. Allows you to change modes. Of course, you can't adjust any of the major settings while the wheels are in motion, but for small stuff you can do that. And you can also use this backlit switchgear if you want. Alright folks, we're taking a little break to take some photos, so check in with you in a little bit. There it is folks, a closer look at KTM's 2026 990 Duke R. There's that Predator headlight which we talked about. I really like the Predator headlight. I'm a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Predator 1, 2, and 3, so that's really cool. Here is the bike. There's that 947cc parallel twin. KTM calls it LC8C for 8 valve cylinder head, and compact, that's the C right there. Of course, it's water cooled. This engine is good for right around 110 horsepower. We talked about that, and upwards of 60 pound-feet of torque at the tire. Really like the packaging of this motorcycle. Look how small the engine is. Look how the exhaust is tucked up underneath where a traditional linkage would be, with the catalytic converter right there. Very, very slick. It's got a nice, mean appearance, and that less insect-like front end is really good. Of course, there's the fully adjustable WP fork with red slider, so you can see how much travel you're using in the stroke. Right now, it looks like we could probably take a little preload out of this fork because we still have this much remaining. Maybe not that much. The fork, this red slider will never really go to the bottom anyways, so we could probably take a little fork preload out. There is no measuring device for the amount of rear shock preload, but still, it's cool that you can adjust the preload right here with that adjuster right there, the Allen key. And there is the damping control on the shock, which you need a screwdriver. That's so strange because you don't need a screwdriver for the fork damping, so why would you need it for the shock? That's just the way it is. There's that seat cant. As you can see, the rear end is a little higher than the front, so it kind of puts you in a little bit more aggressive riding position. It's not crazy because it has this front lip here, but just something to keep aware of. There are those awesome Michelin Power Cup 2 tires that we like so much. Look at that big slick edge on the shoulder of the tire, which gives you so much grip. Alright folks, we're going to do our photo stops, and then we're going to check in with you in a little bit. Alright everyone, that was some good photography. Now it's time to hit the road back on the 990 Duke R. We talked about the engine, we talked about the suspension, we talked about the handling, the brakes, triple hydraulic disc brake from Brembo with radial mount. Calipers up front. Really the big news in the braking department is the fitment of this Brembo MCS adjustable ratio master cylinder. These master cylinders are really awesome because they literally allow you to adjust the ratio of the brake lever. And when we say the ratio, we mean you can actually adjust the amount of feel the brake has. So if you're someone who likes a very immediate brake response, so you barely touch the brake, well then you're going to want this 21 position. If you want a more relaxed feeling front brake lever, well then you'd want the 19. So the bigger the size, the more reaction from the brake lever. It's a very subtle thing, and it's really cool that Brembo and KTM pay attention to the details and allow us to have just the right amount of brake lever input when we're actuating the front brakes. Of course, this bike has IMU powered cornering ABS, so the ABS is lean angle sensitive. So in theory, if you're using too much brake input front or rear at lean, you're not going to lock up the front or rear wheel, which is always a good thing when you're riding. So very neat that this bike has that. The actual brakes, they work really well. I like this motorcycle has a nice responsive back brake. It's not overly powerful, but has a nice level of response, especially when you just barely tap on that rear brake pedal. I'm a big back brake kind of guy. I use it all the time, and it's nice to have a nice responsive rear brake that isn't overly sensitive. Very, very nice. Really like the handling of this motorcycle. It feels very light. 396 pounds with 3.9 gallons of fuel, and it feels that light. Feels in motion. And fairly decent levels of comfort, even though the seat, it looks thin. It's actually been okay. We've ridden this motorcycle almost a tank of gas today, and our rear end feels pretty good. Alright folks, let's hit the road, log some more miles. We'll check in with you. We'll wrap things up back at our destination. Alright everyone, it's me again. Finally have some unmolested by cars turns. These big turns off Highway 74 here near Palm Springs I love. Not the safest road to ride a motorcycle, but definitely is fun. And big and medium, even slow speed turns is where this KTM 990 Duke R is really at home. What a fun motorcycle to ride. Well everyone, we're gonna wrap things up. I know we said that before, but we had more unmolested turns, so I had to do some more yapping. Now we're gonna pull and wrap things up and give you the synopsis of this vehicle. Well everyone, that concludes our official street bike review on KTM's 2026 990 Duke R. This bike's a hoot to ride. Plenty of torque, plenty of power. The engine is really smooth, you know, a little bit of vibration still present, but KTM's really dialed that back, and it's actually a really flexible power band, and it still gets nearly 40 miles per gallon, which is really, really good. Like the handling of this motorcycle, yeah, it takes a little bit of bar pressure, but once it's turning, it turns. And boy, it's light at just 396 pounds. You definitely feel how light that thing is. The suspension works good. Good hold up and when you're going around corners fast, and still has good bump absorption when you're going over the rough stuff. Brakes, love that MCS master cylinder that allows you to really dial in the precise amount of front brake lever input feel. If you're someone who really likes fine brake feel, you're gonna really appreciate that MCS master cylinder. And of course, the color TFT, this thing is just awesome. Touchscreen compatible, nice and big, nice and wide. You can turn your heated grips on and off just like that. How neat is that? You can also go into these settings here and dial in the engine settings, which we showed you right here. We'll show you again. Sorry, I'm kind of messing things up here. Ride mode set, and you can adjust. You can make a custom menu and dial in the Supermoto to your liking. That's the least amount of ABS. You can dial in the traction control. You can dial in the quick shifter, and then you can also reset things. Very slick. Love this color TFT. Love that you can actually use it with some motorcycle gloves like we were using today. Very, very slick. And then that moving map right there on the display. You don't even need to pair your phone or anything. You just use it, and there's the map. How sick is that? I love that. Really slick, really nice. And then of course the aesthetics of this motorcycle. I love this Predator front end. Much more pleasing front end to look at than that insect front end that KTM had before. But what's up with KTM and the insects and the aliens? It really likes the sci-fi with its bikes, but we'll take it. Overall, a very fun, a very fast, and a very friendly naked motorcycle to ride on the street. Well, everyone, that wraps up our official street bike ride review of KTM's 2026 990 Duke R. If you want to learn more, surf on over to moto-1, like we're at number1.com, and see more content in there. And you can check out our KTM bike tab. We have tons of motorcycle reviews on KTM motorcycles and other motorcycles like it, so make sure you surf on over there. And as always, please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Of course, thumbs it down if you didn't. We still love to hear from the haters. We're not a hater, so if the haters want to hate, let them hate. So thumbs it down if you didn't like this video, and stay tuned for our next episode where we ride this motorcycle at the racing track and tell you what it's like to ride around the high banks of Chuckwalla. Well, folks, thanks for riding with us, and we'll see you in the next episode.